Today, we're going to start a multi-part series where we're going to review a highly cited bad paper. So this is the paper in question. It's called "Is a Mask That Covers the Mouth and Nose Free from Undesirable Side Effects in Everyday Use and Free from Potential Hazards?" It's published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Now, before we dive in, we have to talk about a few things. So the first thing is that this is a highly cited paper. 218 different authors have cited this paper. Now, to ground this into context with current relevant events like the MAHA report, we're going to talk about statistical significance, clinical significance, and then we're also going to talk about citations, what they're used for, and then formatting. So first, let's listen to this in the context of current events.
This investigation found that the Hallmark MAHA Commission report that was released last week cites studies that appear to not exist. We know that because in part we reached out to some of the listed authors who said that they didn't write the studies cited. So I want to ask, does the White House have confidence that the information coming from HHS can be trusted?
Yes, we have complete confidence in Secretary Kennedy and his team at HHS. I understand there were some formatting issues with the MAHA report that are being addressed, and the report will be updated, but it does not negate the substance of the report.
So first, what is formatting and what is citation within the scientific context? And what are the issues if these are done incorrectly? So first, starting off with citations. A citation, you're pulling basically a summarized line from a study and then referencing that study. So if we click on the hyperlink here, they're supporting this sentence right here with this link. It goes here, and you can see and pull the paper where that sentence is being leveraged. So what does this mean in a practical context? So if I were to say, hey, the sky is indigo, despite us all looking up and seeing that the sky is blue, you're going to have questions and go, well, no, the sky is not indigo. And I'm going to say, oh, well, the sky is indigo, reference this paper. So the reason this could be a false or misleading statement is if I just completely made up the source like they did in this MAHA report. So I'm saying the sky is indigo, I'm referencing a source that does not exist, therefore my statement is false, and I'm trying to make it seem like it's true by citing something that doesn't exist. So I'm saying the sky is indigo, there's no proof to support that, it's a false claim. And then there's another facet where this can be called a misleading statement. So if I were to say the sky is indigo, you go look at the paper, go through it, and you go, oh wait, the authors are saying, well, the sky is blue, but when you use a certain type of filter to block out certain wavelengths of light, the sky is therefore indigo when you look through this filter. That's a very different statement than me outright saying, hey, the sky is indigo. So that's what's called a misleading statement, that you're trying to say this is a fact, referencing this, but then you look at the original source and it's not saying that at all. Now, the reason this is a problem is because when you're doing a misleading statement, that shows a lack of scientific integrity because you're trying to present a false conclusion leveraging something that does not support that conclusion, which is then a strong indication that you as an author are presenting a scientific bias into your paper. You're trying to push a certain narrative and forcing the facts to fit that narrative or the lack thereof. So now what is formatting? So formatting is basically, in the context of the MAHA report, is just the reference styling of how citations are made, which is patently ridiculous that they're calling it a formatting mistake, and I'll show you why. So when you're doing a citation for a paper, when you're trying to reference it, you go through and you put down all the authors of that paper, and then you put the title of the paper, and then you do the journal that it was published in, the year that that journal was published in, the journal number. So this is the 395th iteration of this journal in the Lancet, and then what pages on that journal could you find that. So it's a very specific lookup so that anyone that is interested in looking through that paper for whatever reason, they go through it, they're like, all right, I go to this journal, I look for this title. If I have a physical hard copy of the journal, I go to I go to version 395, I look to page 1973, and right there, that is where that scientific paper will be, and that's how I can find it. So for that MAHA report, when they're saying, oh, it's just a formatting mistake, don't worry about it, it's no big deal, we're going to fix it, that's sort of sugarcoating how serious of an issue this is, because as I've shown you now, that these citations support the facts that are being presented and the arguments that are being made. So when you're making an argument and your citation does not exist or it's misleading, then your argument crumbles. You don't have any scientific standing in what your argument is, and it's pretty substantial errors. So if you're saying like one thing and you're saying this is the support from this journal and the journal doesn't exist, the paper doesn't exist, the authors didn't write it, you're literally just making things up. And then more specifically to this paper right here, we need to talk about statistical significance and clinical significance because these are two very different things. So working from a high level, statistical significance is when you have two test groups that you're interested in seeing if group A is different than group B. At the very high level, you can do much more statistics at a greater level of intensity and complexity. But at the surface level, you're basically saying, all right, so I have a group of people, in this case, people that don't wear masks, which would be group A, our control group maybe. And then we have group B, people that wear masks. And we want to see if wearing a mask is going to have effects that are different than not wearing a mask in terms of health outcomes, adverse health outcomes. So that would be statistical significance if these had a different effect. So essentially that's all statistical significance is testing is there a different effect between these two groups? And then we'll have to look at clinical significance or clinical relevance. So you can have two groups of things that are different than one another one way or the other, but it might not have a clinically relevant effect. So we'll see in this paper, they like to confound the two things. So they focus primarily on statistical significance, never talking about clinical significance, to sort of imply that there are negative health outcomes that would impact people from a clinical sense, but never talking about the clinical sense, which in all the papers that you look at in depth, the good papers that are referenced within this article, it's showing that no, there are no clinical significant irrelevant outcomes. But what does this mean? So let's say we're focusing on something like increased blood carbon dioxide levels, which would be a bad thing. So if you have increased blood carbon dioxide levels, it could have this whole host of effects. So wearing a mask could have an increased level of those CO2, that blood dissolved CO2 levels, but the clinical significant effect would be up here. So if it got up here, then it would be a very detrimental thing to your health, meaning you shouldn't do it. But if it's within this band down here, you're fine. So even if the groups are different, they're not going to have an impact on your health. And then let's show this a different way for our visual learners. So this paper right here has a really good graphic that I'm going to show you. So we're going to blow this up. So this would be our control group, and then this would be our level of clinical significance. And we can say that there is, within this range, you're okay. So if these two groups are different than one another, so these are the 95% confidence intervals, so we'd look at these and we'd say these are statistically significant, but it's not exceeding clinical significant levels. So despite the increase, this is not something you would be concerned about. But if you had a group of people that were above this clinical significant level, and statistically significantly different than the control group, then that would be something that you would have concerns about. So that's where this becomes very important, because you can have differences within groups that aren't relevant from a treatment or health outcome standpoint, but you can also have health outcomes that are negative or positive that are different than your control group that are also clinically significant. And this is where the nuance is, and this is why it's very important to always ground things within the clinical context when you're talking about health. So now that we've been grounded in all that context and information, let's look at the overall high-level structure of this paper. So going through, we see that they're focusing just on the negative effects of wearing face masks, using a mixture of surgical N95s, cloth masks, FFP2 masks, so a hodgepodge of different types of masks, which we know has their different effects, but only focusing on the negative effects of mask wearing, which is an okay thing to do looking at a targeted question. But when we look through to the next point, they're only looking at statistically significant changes in physiological parameters and what they're quantifying as a pathological direction. So they're focusing only on statistical significance without focusing on clinical significance, which, as we've shown, is something that is a big red flag. It shows us that they're focusing just on if things are heading off in the wrong direction, not if they're exceeding clinically normal parameters. If people are fine operating in this level. It doesn't matter where you are within this level, so long as you're within that level. And that's something that they can found a lot in this paper. And the crazy thing is that they went through and identified 1,213 papers, and after all of their exclusions, they left with only 44 papers. That's a huge level of screening and exclusion. You don't typically see this. And also, when we're going through and looking at their analysis here, so I'll zoom out a little bit, we go through and we have, okay, so we got the fabric, surgicals, N95s, and then we're looking at all of these different parameters. But they're just looking at if it is statistically significant between groups, and if an instance rate of 50% is occurring of these statistically significant parameters. So again, there's no reference here for what are clinically significant levels, and if these papers are exceeding those values, there's nothing in that. And then again, there's no meta-analysis in this. They're not looking through with a targeted question saying, we're looking at this set of parameters, we're thinking that there's this effect, so we're going to see if there's a targeted effect that exceeds clinical significance to see if this is a positive or negative thing for long-term communal mask wearing. So the big red flags right off the bat are using statistical significance while ignoring clinical significance, the fact that they're only retaining 3.5% of the papers they reviewed within their analysis. So that's showing that this is a very uncommon thing to even get statistically significant results for this, or maybe it's not highly studied. But before even diving into this review paper, it has all the hallmarks for a very biased, more opinion type piece than an actual review article. So first, we're going to give you a little teaser and start off with the claims within their abstract. And then in part 2, we're going to start looking through the references and comparing that to what they're saying, and start breaking that down one by one to see where they're making mistakes in their arguments. So the authors claim that the aim of this review was to compile scientifically proven related side effects of mask wearing, where they focus on 44 mostly experimental studies, which is a very weird thing to say, where the authors believe they've compiled enough evidence to show that mask wearing significantly hurts individuals' health. The things they think they've identified is showing a significant correlation with oxygen drop and fatigue, a rise in carbon dioxide levels. They think they've shown that it increases the levels of headaches received while wearing masks, respiratory impairment, and temperature rise, where they then soften their conclusions here by saying that this could lead to relevant effects and consequences in many medical fields. But we'll see that even these findings are incredibly weak as we break down the sources that build the structure of this argument. Follow along for part 2.